The Grand Hall of the World Economic Forum in Davos fell silent as American actor Jonathan Roumie took the stage. His thoughtful, earnest style contrasted sharply with the sea of dark suits of the assembled global elite. Just minutes earlier, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis had concluded a speech that was a scathing, if veiled, critique of cultural leaders challenging his vision of traditional American values. His voice, laden with political gravitas, still resonated in the air. Those who sacrifice foundational principles on the altar of fleeting trends, DeSantis had said, ignore that a society without moral clarity is not a strong society, but one adrift. Camera flashes captured DeSantis's resolute expression as he leaned back in his front row seat, clearly hoping to intellectually dominate the actor, known for his portrayal of Jesus in The Chosen. But Roumie, the artist whose work had connected with millions globally, was unfazed, his eyes fixed on DeSantis as he adjusted his microphone. The seasoned governor, who had become a prominent voice in national conservative circles, thought he had found an easy target in Roumie. What happened next stunned the audience and could forever change how the established world order deals with voices who refuse to play by its rules. The atmosphere was charged with tension. On one side was Ron DeSantis, a champion of conservative principles whose stern countenance had been honed by years of political battles. At 45, he was an undisputed intellectual leader of a significant segment of American conservatism. The cameras focused on him as he reviewed some papers with the reputation that preceded him. Meticulous, sharp, and relentless with those he considered a threat to his worldview. His technique was well known, drawing his opponents into a debate about practical governance and societal impact, and then challenging their perceived idealism with what he presented as common sense and facts. Today, his target was Jonathan Roumie. "We thank Governor DeSantis for his reflections on the challenges facing our culture," said the moderator. "We now invite Mr. Roumie to offer his perspective." On the other side of the stage sat 49-year-old Jonathan Roumie. Since gaining international recognition, he had earned a worldwide reputation for his thoughtful approach to faith and cultural commentary, an approach that had earned him both the acclaim of his fans and the occasional dismissive critique from political commentators. Unlike other cultural figures facing such intimidating audiences, he showed no signs of nervousness. His team had worked all night preparing him, not with political talking points, but with stories, universal truths, and reflections on human experience that often transcend partisan debate. What DeSantis didn't know was that Roumie had brought his own human testimonies, designed to illuminate the governor's carefully constructed political narrative. The confrontation began with deceptive politeness. The moderator gave Roumie the floor, but DeSantis, asking for a microphone, intervened with a thin smile. "Mr. Roumie, welcome. Your portrayal of a historical figure is compelling, but do you not agree that true societal order and freedom are built not on emotional appeals, but on the rule of law and the practicalities of sound governance? Or do you believe that cultural influence, however well-intentioned, can substitute for the hard decisions required of leaders?" The trap was set. If Roumie agreed, he would undermine his own platform. If he didn't, he would present himself as naive or out of touch. "Governor DeSantis, that is a false choice," Roumie responded mildly, rejecting the premise. "It is the kind of dilemma that is only debated in halls like this, thousands of miles from the reality of people's daily struggles. The most fundamental human need is for truth and spiritual peace, and that peace is often stolen by a culture that prioritizes division over unity or cynicism over hope." DeSantis' eyebrow raised slightly, surprised by the direct answer. He quickly changed tactics. "Let me be more specific. Cultural critics, those who actually live and legislate in society, observe a clear decline in civic virtue. That's not a philosophical debate, Mr. Roumie. It's a fact we see in our communities." "Facts, Governor?" Roumie retorted without hesitation. "Let's talk about facts," he signaled to his assistant. The giant screen behind him came to life, displaying a montage of images, community outreach programs, testimonials of individuals finding purpose, and scenes of cultural unity that defied divisive narratives. These are the facts of human experience. The quiet desperation I've seen in so many, which was once ignored, can find solace when we prioritize genuine connection and faith. The question is not whether we uphold every progressive theory, but why for decades have we allowed the erosion of the basic moral fabric that sustains us? The audience murmured. DeSantis' face tightened. This was not going according to plan. "Mr. Roumie," DeSantis insisted, his voice losing its calm, "you are evading the issue. Moral appeals cannot justify the dismantling of established order. Roumie remained impassive. With all due respect, Governor DeSantis, you and your political allies championed policies and engaged in cultural wars that, while appealing to a base, often overlook the profound need for unity and compassion. You defend your political ideology from the safety of Tallahassee, but sometimes that ideology becomes a source of division for ordinary citizens seeking common ground. Isn't that the ultimate politicization of public discourse? Using it to score points instead of building bridges? A collective gasp ran through the room. DeSantis's face reddened. That is a mischaracterization of years of principled political work, DeSantis retorted coldly. Roumie nodded to his assistant, who handed him a tablet. Instantly, the giant screen on the stage changed. I have a story here, Roumie said. It's of a grandmother from rural America, recorded in 2018. She mourned the loss of her grandchild to despair, feeling a deep void in her community. And here, the screen split, showing a recent video. There's the same grandmother watching her other grandchildren actively participating in community service, finding connection and hope. Would you like to see the difference, Governor DeSantis? Or would you rather continue focusing on partisan battles? The tension in the room was palpable. DeSantis looked at the moderator, clearly expecting an intervention. But the latter remained impassive, not daring to fan the flames any further. Mr. Roumie, DeSantis said, his voice now icy, you don't seem to understand the difference between artistic idealism and the practical realities of governance. This is precisely why cultural figures, however popular, should not wade into serious policy debates. You lack the practical context to make these distinctions. It was a direct attack on his understanding, and everyone knew it. Roumie paused, letting DeSantis's condescension hang in the air for all to witness. Then he spoke in a firm and calm voice. Governor DeSantis, I didn't go to political rallies or engage in partisan debates to understand human nature. I learned by listening to stories, by portraying universal truths, and by connecting with people who long for meaning and genuine leadership, not just rhetoric. I fully understand what real peace means to a grandmother who sees her family thrive in a connected community. The question is, do you understand it? The guest gallery erupted in murmurs and a few scattered applauses. The moderator repeatedly called for order. DeSantis, regaining his composure, tried a new tactic. Let me offer you a hypothetical scenario, Mr. Roumie. If, in an effort to promote tolerance, we discard foundational moral principles, and in doing so lead 100 people to lose their sense of purpose and 10 communities to lose their cohesion, has that been a victory for society? It was a classic DeSantis move, the impossible philosophical dilemma designed to force a contradictory answer. Roumie didn't take the bait. That's an interesting scenario for a think tank debate, Governor DeSantis. But today, we are not discussing hypotheticals. We are discussing a documented reality, a society with increasing despair and division that is crying out for authentic moral leadership. And since you like common sense so much, let's talk about real-world impact. He pointed to his tablet, which now displayed images of revived community bars centers, the growth of mentorship programs, and testimonials of individuals finding purpose in areas once plagued by isolation. These are the facts that your political reports never mention. This is the freedom we gave back to our people, the freedom to connect, to believe, and to thrive. DeSantis, visibly frustrated, tried another angle. Let's be honest about what's going on here. This is an attempt to inject abstract cultural narratives into serious policy discussions, perhaps with the sole purpose of elevating a particular viewpoint over the practicalities of governance. It was a desperate move to frame Roumie's legitimate questions as mere personal or ideological ambition. But Roumie was ready. Governor DeSantis, I am called to advocate for truth and human dignity, principles that transcend any political office. You are accountable to your voters and political ambitions, but I believe in an accountability to a higher truth and the enduring values that unite humanity. If fostering genuine connection and restoring hope to communities is cultural commentary, then perhaps we have different definitions of what it means to serve. The moderator, sensing that the debate was getting out of hand, announced a 15-minute recess. As the speakers filed out, cameras caught DeSantis whispering furiously to his advisors. Roumie remained in his seat, calmly checking his phone, where social media was already exploding. Roumie vs. DeSantis was trending worldwide. When the session resumed, the atmosphere had changed. Reporters were broadcasting live from outside the auditorium. DeSantis returned with a composed expression, clearly having used the break to regroup. His strategy had visibly changed. No more hypotheticals. Now he would try to overwhelm him with the weight of political authority. Mr. Roumie, DeSantis began, since you insist on the facts, let's talk about societal trends, the reports from educational oversight bodies and common sense observations. Both point to a systematic erosion of fundamental values in public institutions. Do you dispute the conclusions of these undeniable realities? DeSantis leaned back confidently. He had cited the giants of conservative thought and policy critique. The implication was clear. This was beyond Roumie's depth, but Roumie didn't hesitate. I know those observations well, Governor DeSantis. In fact, they are very interesting, especially since a significant portion of the narrative you champion often aligns perfectly with specific political fundraising efforts in media outlets. It's fascinating. You promote a particular viewpoint, then cite it as if it were impartial truth. In my line of work, we call that a carefully crafted illusion. DeSantis blinked. Clearly, he didn't expect Roumie to attack the source rather than the content. Those are very different circumstances, he began, but Roumie continued. They are different in how exactly those observations address the reality of a unified society. They often reflect a political agenda when communities ignored the very human needs that lead to division. Doesn't that risk unconstitutional bias against honest dialogue? The room fell silent. DeSantis's expression darkened. Mr. Roumie, it is inappropriate and a conspiracy theory to attack a governor's legitimate political efforts in this forum. That's when Roumie played his sleight of hand. He nodded to an attendee. You are absolutely right, Governor DeSantis. Let's not talk about the political efforts you lead. Let's focus on the outcomes. He held up the tablet. I have here observations on the outcomes of certain approaches to public discourse and policy that prioritize division. The screen showed a montage of images, fractured communities, statistics on mental health decline, and scenes of vitriolic public discourse. Would you like to reflect on the role leaders play in fostering such environment at all humans? These are the consequences when rhetoric becomes more important than empathy. The gallery erupted again. DeSantis's face went from red to pale. Those are complex, multifactorial situations. They can, he stammered. Of course they are complex, Roumie interrupted. As complex as the human heart we seek to mend, the difference is that a purely political ideology often failed there, and an approach rooted in universal human values triumphed. And this was not an isolated incident, Roumie continued. I have documentation of at least 7 instances where political interventions disguised as societal solutions exacerbated conflict. But the most worrying thing is this. He raised his tablet and the giant screen split in two. On one side, an editorial from a prestigious international newspaper criticizing the divisiveness of certain cultural policies. On the other, a nearly identical excerpt from a policy paper circulated by a prominent political think tank. Their public statements against a unified social fabric contain paragraphs identical to those published by the world's most influential media outlets. Are you describing global public opinion, Governor DeSantis? Or are you simply amplifying a specific political narrative? The silence that followed was deafening. The cameras captured DeSantis' stunned expression as he realized that the tables had turned completely. No longer did he question Roumie's understanding. Now he was defending his own integrity. This is outrageous, DeSantis finally stammered. You come to this forum with baseless assertions. Are they baseless assertions, Governor DeSantis? Roumie asked calmly. Or are they records of public statements and media analysis that everyone can see? They are observations that people have a right to know and understand. The climactic moment came when Roumie produced one last document. Governor DeSantis, you present yourself as a champion of individual liberty and common sense. Yet many see policies enacted in your state and the rhetoric employed as creating an environment of fear or exclusion for certain groups, or undermining the very unity needed for a stable society. Last year, you stated that challenging woke ideology was a moral imperative. My question is simple. If you are a champion of liberty and common sense, why do your actions often appear to divide rather than unite, and to demonize rather than understand the diverse tapestry of our citizens? The auditorium erupted in pandemonium. The moderator banged the table repeatedly, but he could not restore order. Several diplomats and business leaders stood, some applauding, others shouting objections. Reporters tapped furiously on their laptops, capturing the historic confrontation. Through it all, Roumie remained composed with his evidence laid out before him. DeSantis, the master strategist who had challenged cultural elites for years, sat speechless. Unable to counter the weight of observation Roumie had methodically presented, he had not only defended himself against DeSantis's political challenges, he had completely inverted the debate, transforming himself from question to questioner, from accused to moral advocate. "Recess!" the moderator finally shouted over the din. "This panel will continue tomorrow morning." But everyone knew there would be no turning back. The damage was done. As the speakers left, cameras captured DeSantis's defeated expression in sharp contrast to Roumie's resolute composure. Outside the convention center, a crowd had gathered watching the proceedings on their phones. When Roumie left, spontaneous applause broke out. He had done what many thought impossible. He had held one of the most powerful political voices in America to account on his own turf. The aftermath of the confrontation between DeSantis and Roumie spread like wildfire throughout the world. By sunset in Davos, the video had already racked up hundreds of millions of views. All major news networks abandoned their programming to analyze the historic confrontation that many called a turning point for public discourse. The CNN headline read, "Davos Clash, Roumie launches moral critique of Governor DeSantis." Alternative media took a different angle. Roumie exposes DeSantis. Actor reveals the hypocrisy of political divisiveness. Even mainstream media analysts admitted he had come extraordinarily prepared with compelling human testimonies. Social media exploded. #Roumie challenges. DeSantis and #DeSantis debate dominated the trends. A clip of Roumie asking, "Do you unite or divide?" was viewed more than 200 million times before midnight. Experts and opinion leaders intervened. Harvard professor Lawrence Tribe appeared on MSNBC explaining, "What makes this extraordinary is not just that Jonathan Roumie held Governor DeSantis accountable, it's that he did so using his own words, actions, and the human impact of his rhetoric. It wasn't a partisan attack, it was a statement of moral facts." By the next afternoon, the impact of the debate had reached Washington, D.C. Several politicians known for divisive rhetoric faced sharp questions from their constituents and donors. The international reaction was equally significant. The Guardian published an editorial titled, "A Reckoning for Political Rhetoric." Newspapers from Tokyo to Berlin covered the confrontation as a watershed moment. Former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon broke the traditional silence of former leaders, telling CBS News, "The legitimacy of our leaders depends on public trust and empathy. When that trust is challenged by divisive rhetoric, it is the responsibility of those in power to address concerns transparently, not dismiss them." 3 days after the debate came the breakthrough. The head of the World Economic Forum announced a surprising development for next month's summit. The main theme would be rebalancing discourse towards greater empathy and unity in leadership. A new independent council would be created to review the influence of divisive rhetoric in public politics and media. Although Roumie was not mentioned by name, the timing made the connection unmistakable. The global elite had resisted such measures for decades, but a devastating debate had achieved what years of public pressure could not. Roumie himself remained measured in his public response. In his first interview after the forum, he told an international journalist, "This was never about attacking an individual. It was about strengthening the principle that every society has the right to foster genuine connection and common ground. A world order that listens to the people's heart rather than lectures them is a stronger and more just order. That is all I have defended." When asked about his readiness for the confrontation with DeSantis, he smiled slightly. "I don't need to ask questions I don't already know the answer to. And the answer is that the outcomes of unity are more eloquent than any ideology of division. Governor DeSantis hoped to teach me a lesson about governance. Instead, I think the world learned something about humanity." Political historians began comparing the debate to other defining moments, such as the 1955 Bandung Conference, where developing nations first asserted their independence from the great powers. One Yale professor called it potentially the moment that marked the beginning of the end of the post-Cold War confrontational consensus. For DeSantis personally, the repercussions were swift. 2 weeks after the debate, he announced that his political messaging would undergo a strategic review, and several political figures who had aligned with his more extreme rhetoric publicly softened their stances. Lobbyists and advocacy groups that once celebrated DeSantis as their champion now faced tough questions about his methods and impact. Several announced they would prioritize more inclusive messaging, ending a long-standing practice. For Roumie, the debate transformed him from a controversial cultural figure into a global icon for a new movement advocating for moral clarity and empathetic leadership. Leaders from around the world invited him to speak. Young politicians in Africa, Asia, and Eastern Europe cited his methodical dismantling of DeSantis's arguments as an inspiration. He showed us that preparation and human connections still matter, said a young Hungarian parliamentarian in an interview, that speaking truth to power is not just a slogan. 6 months after the forum, several nations in the Global South pushed a resolution at the United Nations, the Discourse Integrity Act, calling for greater responsibility in political and media messaging, which passed with surprising support. Perhaps the most lasting impact was on public perception. A global Gallup survey showed that trust in political institutions, which had reached historic lows, stagnated, while trust in community-led initiatives and faith-based organizations recovered significantly. Citizens across the political spectrum expressed renewed confidence that their leaders' decisions should be based on national unity rather than external ideological or partisan agendas. The last word perhaps belonged to a retired Singaporean diplomat writing in the Financial Times. The DeSantis-Roumie confrontation reminds us that our global system requires the consent of the governed to function. When political elites fail to engage with empathy, mechanisms emerge for others to do so. Jonathan Roumie didn't undermine the world order. He helped restore some of its balance by insisting on its integrity. As for Governor Ron DeSantis, he continued his political work, albeit with a noticeably more nuanced public profile. The man who had once proudly claimed he could reshape culture and governance now rarely gave public speeches or interviews that lacked a conciliatory tone. A year to the day after the debate, a package arrived at Roumie's office. Inside was a small, hand-carved wooden cross from another nation that had successfully fostered a more unified society. It bore a brief note: "Some battles are worth fighting. Thank you for fighting this one for all of us." It was signed by the newly elected young leader of that country, who wrote that he had decided to enter public service after seeing Roumie that day. The DeSantis-Roumie confrontation had begun as a routine panel at Davos and ended as a pivotal moment in 21st century geopolitical history, demonstrating once again that on the world stage, no power is absolute and no institution is beyond accountability to moral truth and human connection. Wow, what we just covered wasn't just a panel, it was a moment that shook the world order and redefined how moral authority can challenge political power. Jonathan Roumie didn't just debate Governor DeSantis, he dismantled a political narrative piece by piece, proving that genuine connection and truth can be the ultimate accountability measure. The debate's fallout, from a new initiative at the World Economic Forum to DeSantis shifting his tone, shows this is bigger than one event. But what do you think? Will Roumie's approach truly inspire more empathetic leadership? Or will the political establishment find a way to silence voices like his? Let me know your take in the comments below. If you want the full breakdown of moments like this, the moments that actually change history, not just report it, then you need to subscribe right now. We track the seismic shifts in culture and politics, so you'll always be the first to know what's really happening. Hit the like button if you were stunned by this clash, and ring that bell for notifications. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next analysis.